The story today is different from the rest of the stories we usually tell. It's about a police officer who turned into a professional thief and became internationally wanted. This thief, who was once a police officer, managed to rob 20 banks all by himself. After he was caught, everyone thought this was the end of the story. But I can tell you, this was only the beginning. Good evening, everyone. How are you? The story today is unlike our usual ones, and I'd like your opinion on this type of story. It's packed with thrilling events, action, and twists that will keep you on edge. Grab something to eat or drink while you listen. Sit back and enjoy. If you like this kind of story, let us know so we can continue sharing more like it. Our story begins in South Africa with a man named Andreas Tander. Andreas had a normal childhood without any difficulties. His father was a police officer, and when Andreas grew up and graduated from high school, he decided to follow in his father's footsteps. He joined the police academy in 1963. By the age of 26, Andreas was promoted to the rank of captain. However, this promotion didn't come from his own efforts, but rather through his father's influence. His father held a high-ranking position in the police force, and through his connections, Andreas was given the rank. Andreas was then transferred to the Criminal Investigations Department, where he became an investigator. Despite his achievements at such a young age, being an officer, having a supportive father, and living a comfortable life, he was never truly happy or satisfied. Why? Because deep down he never wanted to work in this profession or become a police officer. He was forced to study at the police academy because it was his father's dream for him to follow in his footsteps. So parents, don't pressure your children into becoming engineers, doctors, or anything else against their will. Let them choose the path they want to pursue, where they can excel and thrive. Andreas followed his father's wishes and became a police officer. But as time passed, his mental state deteriorated. He became miserable, unable to cope with his job or the things he witnessed. In 1976, at the age of 30, Andreas witnessed fellow officers shooting at young protesters during the Soweto uprising. Seeing teenagers killed right before his eyes deeply affected him. He couldn't get over it. This traumatic event changed him completely. He became irritable, emotionally unstable, and distant. His relationship with his wife began to crumble, leading to their divorce. After the divorce, Andreas discovered that his ex-wife was pregnant. Feeling responsible, he remarried her, hoping to provide a stable family environment for their child. But the marriage didn't last, and they divorced again. By this point, Andreas' mental health had spiraled out of control. He hated his job, the people around him, and everything about his life. That's when he decided to change his life entirely. In 1977, Andreas made a shocking decision. He would become a bank robber. Yes, you heard that right. A former police officer turned bank robber. The advantage Andreas had was his knowledge of police procedures, investigations, and how alarms worked. He knew exactly how to outsmart the authorities. One day, he booked a ticket to Durban. Back then, airport security wasn't as strict as it is today. Andreas managed to board the plane with a hidden gun, something only undercover officers were allowed to do. When he arrived in Durban, he took a taxi straight to a bank. As soon as he entered, he approached one of the employees, pulled out his gun, and threatened her. "Fill this bag with money," he said. "I want to hear it overflowing." The terrified employee complied, filling the bag with cash. Andreas left calmly, warning her not to press the alarm. He returned to the airport, boarded his flight, and went back to his city as if nothing had happened. For the next 2 years, from 1977 to 1979, Andreas robbed 20 banks using the same method. He lived a luxurious life, buying fancy cars and houses. But in 1979, his luck ran out. He partnered with a man named Caravan Deventer to open a gift shop. Little did Caravan know that Andreas was funding the business with stolen money. One day, Andreas jokingly suggested robbing a bank together. Caravan, however, didn't find it funny. Unbeknownst to Andreas, Caravan was a secret agent working for South Africa's state security agency. He immediately reported Andreas to his superiors. The authorities began monitoring Andreas closely. Eventually, they caught him red-handed robbing another bank. When they arrested him, he confessed to all 20 robberies. During the trial, Andreas claimed that his actions were driven by trauma from witnessing the Soweto uprising. But no one believed him. He was sentenced to 75 years in prison. If you think this is the end of the story, think again. This is where it truly begins. In prison, Andreas earned respect from other inmates because of his background as a former police officer turned bank robber. Among his acquaintances was a man named Alan Hill, who had robbed 5 banks. To Alan, Andreas was a legend. Together, they hatched a plan to escape. On August 11, 1983, Andreas and another inmate named Lee escaped during a physical therapy session outside the prison. They overpowered the guards, stole their weapons, and fled in the therapist's car. They even managed to impersonate police officers to evade capture. For 2 months they remained free, continuing to rob banks at an alarming rate, sometimes 3 or 4 in a single day. Eventually, they split up. Andreas fled to Florida, USA, while Lee stayed in South Africa. Lee's lavish lifestyle attracted attention, particularly from sex workers who tipped off the police. On October 30th, the police surrounded Lee's house. After a shootout, Lee committed suicide rather than surrender. Meanwhile, Andreas continued his crime spree in the UK, where he was eventually arrested in February 1984. However, due to a bureaucratic oversight, he was released shortly after. Realizing the danger, Andreas fled again, but he was ultimately captured in 1985. He was sentenced to 9 years in prison in the UK before being extradited to South Africa, where he received a 25-year sentence. In 2005, Andreas was released on parole. Remarkably, he transformed his life, becoming a motivational speaker. He passed away peacefully on April 17, 2020, leaving behind a legacy as a mastermind of the infamous Standers gang. Thank you for listening to this incredible story. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts. Until next time, take care.